All right. Thank you for tuning into the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. It is currently 6:59 p.m. and today's date is the 3rd of June 2025. Welcome to the live show. Yes, it is officially about to be summertime, and a lot is going on in the United States right now. A lot is going on. Matter of fact, worldwide, a lot is going on. And with that being said, thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have a good show. We're going to have fun. We're going to promote peace. Okay, we're going to promote peace. Doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative, it doesn't matter. What matters is you are American and that you are in love with the idea of being American. All right, that's what matters. All right, it doesn't matter if you're liberal or a conservative. What matters is you love this beautiful country. Now, with that being said, the title for today is America, the Land of Peace. All right? America, the Land of Peace. It doesn't matter what is going on right now. Of course, we see what's going on in Colorado. Of course, we see it. And we see some things going on with protest across the nation. Regardless, we will keep projecting peace in the United States first and then around the world. Now, shout out to Jet. I see you in the comment section, Jet. God bless you for tuning in. Now, in Boulder, this man has been, of course, taken into custody, and there will be more update on this person. But first of all, let's see what CNN has to say about it.
Blaming President Biden for allowing the suspect here to come into the United States. Now, the suspect is an Egyptian national. He did actually come into the United States legally on a tourist visa, but according to the Department of Homeland Security, after that visa expired, he stayed in the United States illegally, only later applying for asylum. That isn't something that the president and his Department of Homeland Security spokesperson has been highlighting on social media following that attack, with Trump once again using his predecessor's record on immigration to try to go after him. Back here in the newsroom tonight, my White House insiders are joining me. CNN's Priscilla Alvarez, Reuters' Jeff Mason, and Sabrina Singh, who is the former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary. And Priscilla, obviously this has been something that we have seen the White House focusing on ever since the identity of this suspect was revealed yesterday. What else are you hearing from people at the Department of Homeland Security about his status, how long he was in the country, and what we know about his time here?
Yeah, there are really two key points that his immigration history boils down to. The first is how he got here. That was through the B2 visa, which could be used for tourism. And that was in August of 2022. Now, when you come on that visa, you can only stay for 6 months. That's generally the limit. And we learned from the Department of Homeland Security that he had later applied for asylum. Over the course of his time with his pending asylum application, he also got a work permit. That is very typical. That work permit, however, expired in March of this year. So if you look at his entire immigration history, he was actually in the United States longer legally than he was illegally. We don't know, however, what his application is right now. I have asked the Department of Homeland Security that. Is it still pending, for example? Has it already been denied given the circumstances of today? That is something we're still waiting to get an answer to, but we do know that as of March of this year, he no longer had papers to be in the United States. Therefore, he was in the U.S. illegally.
How common is that? How many people, I mean, I think we focus, and you do with your reporting, understandably, on the border and what's happening there, people who cross illegally. How many people generally are in the United States that do overstay a visa? I imagine a lot.
A lot, and this has really put a spotlight on the various overstayers that are here in the United States. According to a think tank, 40% of the undocumented population in the United States are actually people who have come here on a visa, they've entered the United States illegally, then overstayed that visa because there are limits as to how long you can be in the United States on each of these. I will tell you, however, that what he did, coming on a visa, then applying for asylum, that's actually quite common. There are people who come from all over the world on visas and then apply for asylum here. So the occurrence here was pretty standard with what we've seen with other visa overstayers.
You worked under President Biden in several different roles in his administration. What is your response when you hear President Trump and people in his White House criticizing Biden and saying, you know, this happened on his watch?
Well, I think what Priscilla points out is that, you know, this individual came here legally. Yes, it was under the previous administration, but his status and, you know, his illegal status, you know, it expired in March 2020.
What are you even talking about? What are you guys talking about? Oh man, this is why I don't get it. I don't get it. You know what this guy did in Boulder, Colorado, and this is what y'all are talking about? Oh, he came in here legally, but now his status is not legal. Can you talk about the total BS that he actually did and that he's here now illegally? Man, CNN.
Various overstayers that are here in the United States. According to a think tank, 40% of the undocumented population in the United States are actually people who have come here on a visa. They've entered the United States illegally, then overstayed that visa because there are limits as to how long you can be in the United States on each of these. I will tell you, however, that what he did, coming on a visa, then applying for asylum, that's actually quite common. There are people who come from all over the world on visas and then apply for asylum here. So the occurrence here was pretty standard with what we've seen with other visa overstayers.
You worked under President Biden in several different roles in his administration. What is your response when you hear President Trump and people in his White House criticizing Biden and saying, you know, this happened on his watch?
Well, I think what Priscilla points out is that, you know, this individual came here legally. Yes, it was under the previous administration, but his status and, you know, his illegal status, you know, it expired in March 2025 of this year. I think there's a lot of conversations that should be had of people overstaying their visas. And at the end of the day, these people should follow the law. You know, under the previous administration, under the one that I served, immigration, you know, border crossings were going down. But of course, we've seen this president use it as a talking point and something that he certainly ran his election on, that they're going to keep pushing this message. And so it's not a surprise that we're seeing Donald Trump coming out swinging so hard on this. But again, I mean, taking the politics out of it, you have 12 people that were injured horrifically in an attack like this. We should really see the rhetoric on this violence come down and hopefully have more security at events like this so people can peacefully, whether it's organized protest, whatever it is, do so in a peaceful manner, but with, you know, a security apparatus around them as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, certainly not how the Trump White House sees it, as you know very well, Jeff. I mean, they have said this is why Trump won, in part, that this was part of what helped him get into the White House. What are you hearing from people at the White House tonight in terms of, we've seen what the administration has been doing on going after and tamping down border crossings and bringing them down to low levels, but what about the people who have overstayed visas? Is that going to become a new target for them?
Well, I think in general, this just solidifies their view that they're doing the right thing with regard to immigration broadly and with regard to a crackdown on the border, with regard to this latest issue that you're raising too about overstayers. You know, very important to say awful what happened. It's unacceptable. But that aside, this White House is not going to jettison the politics. They're going to use this as an opportunity to say, to blame his predecessor, blame President Biden, and focus on what they're doing because it's been a winning issue for President Trump as a candidate and as somebody who's serving as commander-in-chief.
Yeah, and different visas, tourist visas, obviously last at different periods.
Right.
Do we know how long an Egyptian tourist visa would last for an Egyptian national?
A B2 visa for this would be, again, about 6 months, and he would have had to, but what's interesting here is he applied for asylum during that period. So this is really the state of our immigration system, is it gets very patchy very quickly. You can come on one visa, then apply for something else, fall out of status here, but still have this other paper over there. And this is where it gets so complicated. And this is why White House border czar Tom Homan has repeatedly said he plans to widen the aperture of the people that they are arresting in this country.
Yeah, great to have you all here. Thank you for that reporting.
This weekend's assault is just the latest in an alarming rise of anti-Semitic incidents across the United States. According to the Anti-Nation League, there were more than 9,000 last year. In 2014, there were fewer than 1,000. That is a tenfold increase in the last 10 years. There's no question that if we were seeing what we've seen over the last several months, for Josh Shapiro's house being firebombed, you have this incident, another in which two individuals who worked at the Jewish embassy were shot basically at point blank. This would be considered a 5-alarm fire of a problem that we have in this country, Bill. I mean, do you think that there is a willingness to acknowledge at this point something is happening here and it needs to be stopped before it becomes a big
for real?
I think
Really?
there's a willingness to acknowledge it. I don't know if there's a willingness to do, or to try to do, it's not so easy, obviously, to try to do what you might do to really stop it. I mean, are you going to really put serious law enforcement, people on this case? The Trump administration is busy deporting 5-year-olds and 18-year-olds and people who've lived here peacefully for 40 years. Maybe they should take some of those resources from DHS and the FBI and get them back to fighting domestic terrorism, which incidentally was a focus for the last few years and may have had some success. So I hope we take it very seriously, yes. But I think it's important to take it seriously practically, And we have to deal with the anti-Semitism. That has been around for a long time. It's a very complicated thing to deal with as a sort of sociological or intellectual thing. But there's a lot law enforcement can do to make this less, not to make it impossible, to make it less likely to happen.
Let me just play what Senator John Fetterman, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, said about this. Listen.
This is just rampant across all the universities, for all these places too. I mean, we really need to call it what it is. And now, and for me, politically, being very, very firmly side on the Israel, that kind of put parts of my party at odds for that. And I just want to continue. And I think we need to deliver a legislative solution too and really address anti-Semitism and just call it what it is.
Is he right, Congressman, that this is an outgrowth of what's happening on universities and on college campuses?
Well, first, we have to acknowledge that there is a crisis of anti-Semitism. Jewish Americans are feeling unsafe. I agree with Bill that we need more law enforcement, but we also need people in my party clearly, unequivocally condemning anti-Semitism, condemning things like globalize the Intifada or River to the Sea chants. So to the extent that there are irresponsible words out there and people aren't condemning them and saying that that's hate, then that is contributory. But what we don't want to do, in my view, is to stifle speech. And so we need to condemn unequivocally hate speech, but allow for the free expression at universities.
But Abby, if I could jump in, the problem is not enough Democrats did that last year when these college protests were rampant. They made the excuse that it was all free speech. They made the excuse that people had the freedom to assemble under the First Amendment. When many Americans, many Republicans, and even some Jewish Americans, Jewish students were saying this is going to lead to violence. Well, the chickens have come home to roost. And while there are some Democrats, congressmen, who have indeed come out against anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist rhetoric, there are a whole lot who have not said a single word, in part because they were so interested in wanting to make sure that they had those votes last year, which it didn't pan out for them.
Come on. Do you think any of these, the shooter in Boulder or the shooter in Washington, were influenced by what Democratic members of Congress said?
So you think the college
Do you think they were influenced by Harvard?
Meant nothing?
I think they were bad, and I actually was somewhat involved in trying to get Harvard to be tougher on them. They were bad for Harvard. They were bad for the general atmosphere. You think those people? That guy in Boulder was paying careful attention. Was paying careful attention. Social media does a lot more trouble. Social media.
Would you not agree with that?
What?
Would you not agree that we have a problem with anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic rhetoric on college campuses across the country?
We have had a problem. It's much less today than it was a year and a half ago. I know many people who graduated from college in the last week or two who had good experience. I know some Jewish students who were harassed occasionally and whose life was made uncomfortable, which should not happen. I think there were administrations that were too weak. I agree with that. But I think that's a long way ago from some people taking guns and shooting people point blank.
Yeah, I agree. Here's what we also have to acknowledge. And I agree that a lot of the college students and the colleges and the leaders did not deal with this as they should have. But we also have to acknowledge, Abby, that the rise of anti-Semitism in the last decade can be correlated with the rise of Donald Trump. And the kind of language that he gives a permission slip for all of this anti-Semitic language to be used, in a way that we really hadn't seen before. The President of the United States,
Blame Trump.
When you have dinner with a neo-Nazi, when you pardon people who are the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, whose groups have an ideology that supports anti-Semitism, when you have anti-Semitic tropes that you traffic in and that you amplify on your own social media, where you have followers of millions of people, you cannot give a pass to the President of the United States with the kind of megaphone that he has and say, oh, he has absolutely nothing to do with this.
That is absolutely nuts. You guys are barely scratching the surface here. This isn't just about we need more Democrats to condemn what's happening. How about let's get Democrats not joining in on it? How about AOC and Representative Omar don't join those college campuses? And this hasn't been going on for 10 years. It's been going on for 18 months. And it starts on the college campuses. It empowers people to go beyond. And it has nothing to do with Donald Trump.
I want to be a little bit more specific about what we're talking about here, because I definitely think, to the Congressman's point, there are specific things that are being said on these campuses that are anti-Semitic. But the idea that AOC and, I don't know, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar are engaging in those activities, I'm not sure there's a lot of evidence of that.
They spoke at the campuses.
You know what I mean?
They were there on those campuses.
But I guess, but here's what I'm saying. But do you understand what I'm saying? If they show up on college campuses to protest, what's the situation in Gaza, are you saying automatically the same thing as uttering anti-Semitic words?
Yes, they're anti-Semitic. Make no mistake about it. Their words are absolutely, and this is all based in anti-Semitism.
Right, what I'm saying is, do you have evidence that they actually engaged in anti-Semitic language? That is the issue.
You know, supporting terrorists and some
of her past.
Are you saying? Do we have to go through the statements?
I am talking about on college campuses. Because I think that there is a difference.
The history of
protesting
is very clear.
There's a history. There's a difference between protesting and saying and doing anti-Semitic things. Would you not agree?
Ilhan Omar's rhetoric, as it pertains to Jewish people in the state of Israel, is deplorable and disgusting. She shouldn't even be in Congress, in my opinion. And them showing up on those college campuses is a green light for the most vicious, disgusting, despicable rhetoric against Jewish students and against Jewish people. You can absolutely draw a correlation. And to pretend that they were on the college campuses and saying kumbaya is to just be naive.
The governor and I were talking to President Bush Sr. Before we got on the set, and the tone he set for this country. You know what I think is sad? The Democrats are saying, oh, it's Trump's fault, the anti-Semitism. The Republicans are saying it's the Democrats' fault. How about we just have leadership in this country that starts to bring this country together to condemn anti-Semitism, condemn the terrorism, stop blaming each other. And that's the type of leadership we had, whether it was Reagan, whether it was President Bush Sr., whether it was President Obama. We need to get back to that. But wouldn't you agree we need a cultural change? Under students and kids under the age of 30 years old, this is prevalent. This is commonplace. Even the kids that aren't showing up on those campuses think that there's a massive problem with Israel and we should all support Hamas and Gaza. These are the same people that say, well, it's about the women and children that are being killed, yet did nothing about the 300,000 people that were murdered in Darfur or the 500,000 in Ethiopia. They're picking and choosing their self-righteousness.
You don't think it has anything to do with Donald Trump's anti-Semitic rhetoric and the tropes that he actually puts out there?
But Maria, I do think we have to take the point that he's making, which is that in the last 18 months, since October 7th, the rise in anti-Semitism is clear. That is not a Donald Trump thing. That is a clear outgrowth of this particular moment that we are in. And Trump has his problems, but I do think you have to acknowledge that there is something going on
Abby.
here. Maybe a permission structure that needs to be addressed or should have been addressed 18 months ago.
Yes, I mentioned that when I
didn't mention
that a lot of what was going on the college campuses, the leaders of those college campuses, which frankly paid the price for it, did not handle it very well.
Oh, girl, sit down.
We have to go back. I feel like everyone is giving Donald Trump, letting him off the hook for the kind of language that he permits. When you have an administration like his, where you have officials within the administration that have a history of anti-Semitic actions and words and associations, you can't take that out of the equation in terms of where we are now. And this didn't just happen after October 7th.
A problem that started 18 months ago.
Well,
No one was
killed.
No one was killed in Pittsburgh. No one was killed. No one was killed. Sure, Michael. No one was killed in Pittsburgh. No one was killed in Pittsburgh in 2018. Is that what you're saying? It only started.
I was just going to
How many people were killed in Pittsburgh?
Bill,
What were the motivations of that guy?
When did we see an increase in campus protests?
How many people were killed? How many people were killed?
About 18 months ago. Bill and Chair Michael, give me 1 second.
And you can be against Ilhan Omar. I happily against them both.
And
I think most Democrats are against them both.
Chair Michael,
and some Republicans are
I do
against
think
them
it is
both.
a fair point that it would be actually a disservice to Jewish Americans to pretend as if anti-Semitism only began
that's not what I'm saying.
18 months ago.
Let me be clear.
And that the motivations of anti-Semitic attacks, when you really look back on the history of it, are many. And there are some on the left and some on the right. So that is the point that Bill's making, right? That is the point
I'm talking explicitly about college campus protests. You can trace it to about 18 months ago, the increase. That's what I'm saying. And Democrats had every opportunity to address this. They did not.
And Shimon joins us now from Boulder. What were you learning about the Holocaust survivor who was injured?
Well, sadly, her daughter was with her yesterday, and she was seriously injured. Her daughter has some serious burns. The Holocaust survivor also suffered some injuries, some burns to her feet, and so she's been really worried about her daughter. I last exchanged texts with her last night, and she said she was exhausted and in a state of shock, and she was just hoping that she could just take care of her daughter. Everyone who I've talked to who knows her says, like, the strength that this woman has and what she means to this community, they just can't explain. And they say they're just so happy that she's okay, and they're looking forward to seeing her and really hearing from her and to get her take on everything that happened. And so far, she hasn't wanted to talk about it. As you can imagine, Anderson, everyone wants to speak to her. But for now, she's just really worried about her daughter and trying to take care of her, Anderson.
Well, we wish her the best. Shimon, thank you very much. Joining us now, CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller. What stands out to you about, first of all, this attack?
A couple of really interesting things. One, we're observing a shift in offender characteristics. You know this better than I do, but if you look at your school shooters, your lone wolf terrorist attacks, what you usually see is someone who is in a stage of serial failing, socially, educationally, employment, no social network. They go into the propaganda, they drink the Kool-Aid, and they are convinced that doing this terrible thing will make them stand out and to some be a hero. In the Jewish Museum case, you know, we have an employed individual who actually went to work that day, ran a conference for his company, and did that after. He lives in Chicago with his girlfriend. He was substantial, if not wildly successful. In this case, you've got an individual who has a wife, 5 children, lives in a house in a suburban area. The neighbors brought cupcakes when he moved in. He waited to do this attack until his daughter had graduated from college. So we're seeing people who are doing 2 very different things. One, they're willing to walk away from a lot. And 2, and this is striking, they're not fleeing the scene, trying to get away, trying to mask their identity. They're not taking on police or trying to get police to kill them. They're waiting, trying to own this attack.
The Boulder officials said that the suspect was not on their radar, and though he had these immigration issues.
Nor was the Jewish Museum suspect. And nor was the individual who attacked the Pennsylvania governor with Molotov cocktail in the governor's mansion while he slept, except for minor drug arrests. So we're seeing that too. Although it is typical in terrorism cases that they're not on the radar for criminal behavior, but sometimes you run into them in the chat rooms and other places. These people haven't really turned up.
I mean, I remember back after Oklahoma City, you know, people buying large amounts of agricultural fertilizer would suddenly pop up on law enforcement radar. Something like this, small amounts of gasoline, I assume that's what the accelerant was. I mean, people go to gas stations all the time with a can.
Well, that's right. And also look at where we are. We're not in New York City or Chicago. This is in the 100-mile drive between Colorado Springs and Boulder, which is a land of people who use lawnmowers, riding mowers, all kinds of leaf blowers, things that use gasoline in small amounts, where he stopped at 3 different gas stations along the way to fill up
Just not to, apparently not to attract attention at anyone, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. John Miller, thanks very much. Appreciate it. Shortly before air, I spoke to eyewitness Omer Shakar, co-leader of the Run for Their Lives March, and Miri Kornfeld, a director with Stand With Us Colorado, a pro-Israel group that works with march organizers. Omer, can you walk us through what happened yesterday, what you remember?
We were walking on Pearl Street, a busy street here in Boulder, to share the voice. We're not chanting, we're not screaming, we're not engaging. We were doing our regular route, and we go to the courthouse where we gather, take some pictures, and read the names of the hostages. This is where the terrorist has been waiting for us. When we gathered, he threw Molotov cocktail under the legs of my friends, and they lit them in fire.
Did he say anything initially?
No, he wanted to keep it a surprise. He didn't say anything. The first thing was throwing the Molotov cocktail at us, and after that, he was chanting and screaming.
What can you tell me about your friends who were attacked? I know one of them is 88 years old. She has very serious burns.
Correct. In our group, there are kids and there are people and elderly. This woman, unfortunately, the bottle hit her and she fell into the fire, and this is why she's severely burned. We wish her quick recovery. We're sending her all the prayers. There are a few more others that were rushed to the hospital. One of them is a Holocaust survivor. She's so determined. I just heard from her. She's doing better. She's been released, but she's determined to keep walking. She said, "Yeah, see you on Sunday." Those are the people that we are walking together.
Obviously, we just heard he's going to be charged with a hate crime. I know Jewish leaders have called for swift action in the aftermath of this attack. Miri, what would you like to see happen, either the local, the state, the federal level?
Absolutely. I think it's really important that everybody in the world remember that when we're marching and Run for Their Lives, we're marching for the hostages that were taken on October 7th, the over 240 people who were kidnapped from their homes by Hamas militants. Hamas, the internationally recognized terrorist organization, and they massacred 1,200 people in Israel. That terrorism and that massacre, in addition to the follow-up hate crimes and anti-Semitic acts that have happened all over the world, not only in North America, need to be condemned at the highest levels by all elected officials and by everybody who has a heart. Anti-Semitism left unchecked turns into this, and this is what happens when people call to globalize the Intifada. This is what it looks like.
Omer, is there anything else you want people to know?
My concern that this event, one or similar events, won't be just against Jewish people. We as a society need to condemn any act of violence, because now it was with Jewish people and one person that didn't like to hear what those people had to say, but it can be against any other community. And I think this is the message that we need to take from this incident.
Well, Omer, Miri, thank you so much for talking with us. And again, I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson. We appreciate you.
It was John Miller, and I talked about a moment ago, this attack is only one of several recent incidents and a growing longer-term problem. According to the Anti-Defamation League, there were a record 9,354 acts of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, and violence in 2024. Joining us now, ADL CEO and National Director Jonathan Greenblatt, also former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. Jonathan, we mentioned this rise in incidents. Was the potential for something like this on your radar?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Anderson. The Jewish community hasn't really had a moment to breathe since October the 7th. Day after day, it's incident after incident, assaults, vandalisms, demonstrations, harassment, the list goes on. So in many ways, I think this was predictable. We're seeing Zionists demonized. We're seeing Israelis, dehumanized. And we've seen anti-Semitism really normalized in the public conversation.
I mean, this is a march that's been happening regularly without incident in Boulder, Colorado. I mean,
even calling it a march is generous. I mean, these are elderly people,
walking,
walking around a park. and that this man planned it for a year, and that he was so meticulous in his planning. And as the FBI reported today, not only did he say free Palestine yesterday, not only did he say, I want to end all Zionists, he looked up where was a Zionist group, and he said, I want to kill as many Zionist people as possible. This isn't normal.
And according to police, he said he would do it again.
Absolutely.
If he could. Andrew, I mean, should this attack on Boulder have been on law enforcement's radar somehow? Would his immigration status have been enough to raise a red flag?
Not really. Not really. I mean, realistically, every person who overstays a tourist visa doesn't come on the radar of either local law enforcement or federal law enforcement. It's not traditionally been the sort of thing that certainly the FBI or their other law enforcement partners have been focused on if that person has not done something else. They haven't been involved in criminal activity or come up in intelligence reporting as someone who might be extreme. But I think really important thing here, Anderson, is to point out that number that you quoted, that 9,000 plus number of anti-Semitic acts in 2024 is about 5% higher than the number that we experienced in 2023. So that's in any 2 years, that's a pretty big jump. But if you go back to 2019, the number from 24 is over 300% higher than the number from 2019. So you can't really even get your mind around how significant October 7th is as a point of radicalization for people like this person and others who would be inclined to follow their extremist beliefs and take action by inflicting violence upon the Jewish community. We are off the charts in terms of threats to this community. And, we really need to be doing everything possible to limit that.
The man accused of using a makeshift flamethrower and Molotov cocktails to set people on fire during a peaceful march in support of Israeli hostages, just making his first court appearance. It was quick and he did not speak. But according to investigators, we are learning that Mohammed Sabri Solomon said he had been planning the attack for over a year and that he had with him another 16 Molotov cocktails that were not even used.
He said that he had previously tried to purchase a firearm, but resorted to the Molotov cocktails when he could not purchase a gun because he was not a legal citizen.
Terrifying to think about this. The only reason he couldn't purchase that gun was because he wasn't a legal citizen. To think how much worse this tragedy could have been. Solomon now is charged with 16 counts of attempted murder, also charged with a federal hate crime. This video was taken during the attack, and it shows one woman severely injured. You can see we have blurred her, obviously suffering from injuries there. Bystanders are trying to douse her with water to put out the burns. The camera then pans towards the suspect, who at that time was still walking around. According to witnesses talking to CNN, the suspect was yelling "Free Palestine" during the attack. 12 people were injured with burns and other injuries. And this latest act of anti-Semitic violence comes just 2 weeks after 2 Israeli embassy staff members were shot dead in Washington. Their attacker also accused of yelling "Free Palestine." And 49 days after Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro's residence was set on fire, according to the warrant, a suspect told 911 operators he targeted the governor in part because of what he believed were Shapiro's views on the war in Gaza. Whitney Weil begins our coverage tonight live from Boulder, Colorado. And Whitney, obviously a ton of new information here just in these past, really over this past hour coming in about the attack and the planning in this arrest warrant that you have gotten your hands on. What more can you tell us?
What is so remarkable about this arrest warrant, Aaron, is that according to law enforcement, he expressed no remorse for his actions. The arrest warrant makes very clear that he told law enforcement he would do it again, and he described why he did it, how he did it. And further, Aaron, there was a little bit more detail about what he was thinking as this crime was unfolding. So as you had mentioned, there were multiple Molotov cocktails that he did not detonate. And he said that as he through the first 2, he got scared because he'd never hurt anyone before. But even still, he told law enforcement he would do it again. It's simply remarkable. Law enforcement really praised the response from other law enforcement, the long list of police officers and federal agents who responded immediately, but also, Aaron, the community who rushed in to help their neighbors when they were injured.
There was a male with a blowtorch setting people on fire. I know that there was at least one party rolling around in flames.
Armed with Molotov cocktails and a makeshift flamethrower, authorities say 45-year-old Mohammed Sabri Solomon burned at least 12 people at a weekly Jewish gathering in downtown Boulder as they peacefully marched, calling for the release of Israeli hostages in Gaza.
Medical for multiple burns on the courthouse block.
According to law enforcement, Solomon sprayed gasoline while holding a lighter in the direction of the marchers Sunday afternoon while yelling, "Free Palestine." The FBI is investigating the case as an act of terrorism.
The person who threw the Molotov cocktail had two more in his hand. And he was holding them and he was yelling and he was screaming at everybody. I think he was saying, "You're killing my people."
An elderly Holocaust survivor was among the victims.
He's making Molotov cocktails.
Law enforcement says 2 Molotov cocktails were thrown and 16 more were found at the scene.
Mr. Solomon stated that he had been planning this attack for a year. And he acted because he hated what he called the Zionist group.
During the attack, Solomon took off his vest and shirt as they caught fire, according to witnesses. According to an affidavit, he told the FBI he wanted to kill all Zionist people and wished they were all dead, stating he would do it again. Solomon is in the country illegally, according to Homeland Security. He is an Egyptian national and had lived in Kuwait and applied for asylum but was denied a visa. DHS said he entered the country in August 2022 as a non-immigrant visitor and was granted a 2-year work authorization in March 2023 that has since expired. Solomon appeared in court today.
This is the matter concerning Mohammed Suleiman.
Solomon is facing 16 counts of first-degree attempted murder, as well as multiple counts of assault and felony use of incendiary devices, among other state and federal charges. Recent anti-Semitic incidents have become increasingly violent. Sunday's attack coming after 2 Israeli staff members were shot and killed in Washington, D.C. outside an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum nearly 2 weeks ago.
Free Palestine!
And nearly 2 months after a man set fire to the Pennsylvania governor's mansion using Molotov cocktails.
Aaron, according to that arrest affidavit, he told law enforcement that he expected to die in this exchange. Law enforcement has listed off the long list of charges here. There are more than 40 state charges. DOJ is handling the hate crime charge. The DOJ hate crime charge with an attempted murder underneath it, according to the Department of Justice, the U.S. attorney here in Denver, that carries with it, if convicted, a maximum of life behind bars, very similar to the state charges. The state charges in total, Aaron, carry a maximum of more than 400 years behind bars. Aaron.
All right, Whitney, thank you very much in Boulder tonight. Out front now, Boulder Police Chief Stephen Redfern. And Chief Redfern, I really appreciate your time tonight. We're learning a lot more now about the planning that went into this attack. I mean, what are you able to share about the planning and how much worse, frankly, this incident was intended to be?
Yes, so we know now that this suspect planned this terror attack for over a year. And of concern, as you might have heard in the press conference, he attempted to purchase a firearm. I am so grateful that that didn't happen. I can't imagine how much worse this would be if he was able to do that. And so it's very clear he was intent on harming people. And I'm just glad that we were able to get there relatively quickly and contain this before it was worse.
Yeah, I mean, you can only imagine how horrific it could have been, and it, so horrible as it is, but to imagine some sort of a firearm and how much death and carnage that could have caused. The affidavit so far says that he told police, and I quote, he wanted to kill all Zionist people and wished they were all dead. Have his conversations with police given you more information about his motive?
There's been extensive conversation. Interestingly enough, the suspect was cooperative, and detectives interviewed him yesterday afternoon. And I think to your quote that you just gave from the affidavit, I mean, that is clearly the motive. We have no other motive that's come out at this point. I don't want to say that there might not be something else that comes out down the road, but right now it became apparent in the first few hours that was the motive.
So the affidavit also says that his wife gave police an iPhone. that had belonged to her husband. And it also says that, he told police that he left an iPhone at his house, and that on there were messages to his family, as well as a journal that he left. Can you share with anything with us about, what he wrote in that journal or what he says in any of these communications?
I can't, and only because our partners with the FBI handled the entire scene down in Colorado Springs where his residence was, so I haven't seen that. I have not talked to the FBI about that. They processed that entire scene, and those things are in their possession.
So you say he lived in Colorado Springs, and obviously it's about 2 hours away from Boulder. And we understand that the sheriff's department there says that they'd received 3 non-criminal calls, that's how they describe them, to his house over the past couple of years, or since 2022. Is there anything more you can tell us about those calls? And to the point that he had, as you said, wanted to purchase a firearm and couldn't, was he on anyone's radar before the attack?
So I'm not familiar with the calls for service. El Paso County Sheriff would have to provide those. I haven't seen those either. We did not have on our radar here before the attack. And I know in talking with our partners with the FBI, a question was asked at the press conference. They also, including the Joint Terrorism Task Force, did not have this suspect on their radar. So as far as I know, there was nothing that pre-indicated that this suspect was coming to Boulder to do this attack, which obviously makes this all the more scary.
Right. Well, especially when you're talking about it, that he planned it for over a year, right? That wouldn't have actually risen to anybody's radar from what you understand right now. In your press conference right after the attack, I know you said that you're not calling it a terror attack at this point. Those were your words, Chief. Now that you know more about the motive, right? You've got more information. Are you comfortable calling this a terror attack?
Absolutely. And I just want to say to that, we did that press briefing very early on. There were so many moving parts. I was not comfortable in that initial briefing, even though we had a really good idea that it was going to be called terrorism. It was a targeted terrorist attack. We were being very careful at that point because at that point we were still interviewing the suspect, interviewing multiple victims and witnesses, and we did not want to put out something that was inaccurate. We were being very cautious at that, and obviously that changed. The later press conference in the evening, we were very clear that we believe this was indeed terrorism, and I still stand with that.
All right. Well, Chief Redfern, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for tuning into the live show. They just told you that this person is an illegal. He's overstayed his visa. You're saying that the problem is not the illegals. All right. Okay. The problem is not the illegals. So what is the problem? How do we solve this division that just keeps getting wider and broader every day? What is the problem? Okay, the problem is not the illegal. All right, I get it. Okay. What is the actual problem?
Tonight, masks, baseball caps, and sunglasses. Well, federal law enforcement is masking up when they're cracking down. And it's raising questions over whether officers simply are protecting their identities or engaging in intimidation. Well, last week, a U.S. congressman confronted ICE officers arresting asylum seekers at a New York courthouse. Heavily armed and masked agents conducted an immigration raid near a popular restaurant in San Diego. And on Friday, masked agents of multiple agencies refused to identify themselves as bystanders as they detained a gardener in Western Massachusetts. The acting ICE director says the agents are covering up to protect their families.
People are out there taking photos of the names, their faces, and posting them online with death threats to their family and themselves. So I'm sorry if people are offended by them wearing masks, but I'm not going to let my officers and agents go out there and put their lives on the line and their family on the line because people don't like what immigration enforcement is.
One of the reasons that this has become an issue, we talked about the congressman who interacted with them. Another congressman, Dan Goldman, said that immigration officers were engaging in intimidation, essentially. Let's listen to what he had to say.
This is Gestapo-like behavior, where plainclothes officers wearing masks are terrorizing immigrants who are doing the right thing by going to court, following up on their immigration proceedings, and trying to come into this country lawfully, which is through asylum.
So in that case, it was at a courthouse where people were coming in for their regular check-ins, and what they're doing is they're dismissing the cases so that they can then arrest them on the outside. So that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, well, look, again, if it's about protecting the police officers, then I have absolutely no problem with it. ICE is not a local law enforcement or even state police where community policing gets involved. It's a whole different aspect and a different role. We've seen it before. We were talking during the break. I've seen my law enforcement, if they're doing a drug bus, big bus of crack houses and that sort of thing, it's not completely unwarranted. So no,
but these
if
are
it's
people
about
who are at the courthouse because they have a pending asylum
But if
claim.
it's a policy, it's a policy. If the policy is you're going to wear a mask, you're going to wear a mask.
And usually, I guess in some of these cases, not necessarily criminals. So you're not talking about gangbangers and drug busts. I mean, although perhaps there are some people that they're doing that with, but not in this particular
But again, if
case.
the agency has a policy and for consistency's sake, they're going to wear the mask to protect themselves and their family's identity, because it's not just about what they're doing in that moment. It's that, well, there's an ICE agent. Oh, and there's Fred down the road. And we know him and we know his family. And there's obviously a lot of political angst against this and a lot of, words like Gestapo tactics and these are terrorists and all that kind of stuff, which is complete nonsense. So when you have that kind of inflammatory language and they want to protect themselves and their family, they have every right to do that.
The problem is that it has to be viewed in the broader context. You have Vice President Vance saying that the 14th Amendment of due process does not apply to immigrants in this country, even though the 14th Amendment applies to every person. He's saying people who are here as immigrants get less of a standard of due process. They shouldn't get the same rights. In that context, when you have masked agents going, it's hard to believe that it's simply for their own protection. If there was for their own protection, I'd be sympathetic. But you have a systematic assault justified by the vice president to deprive people of fundamental due process.
That's because Bill Clinton signed a law in the 1990s that said illegal immigrants don't have the same due process. You can go blame Bill Clinton for that.
The Constitution.
And the law was signed by Bill Clinton, but no one complained about it for 20 years.
Hold on, Governor. I mean, the Supreme Court justices have said that it applies to immigrants.
But it doesn't have to be the exact same process of due process.
Due process does apply. But I mean,
you have
here's
to
the
have
thing.
an ability
I do think that
to defend yourself.
Notably, this is different, right? Like in the past, ICE agents did not go around wearing masks. Like we
in the past, they weren't called Gestapo.
Different, Abby. Right. I mean, but it's only different because the Trump administration clearly has made this a policy.
Yeah.
Before they were deporting people. They deported many people under the last two administrations. Trump, Biden, and Obama. They did not wear masks as a course of routine course. So why is this happening now?
I think the difference now is that you have a greater propensity and likelihood for individuals to state where these people live, put photos of them, their wives, their children on the internet, have people showing up in front of their houses. So I do think it is a legitimate concern, as the director said. Look, these guys are doing their jobs. They're removing people who entered the country illegally. They have indeed broken the law. And we want to protect these individuals, our officers, and their families. So I'm not necessarily against it, so long as they're arresting these individuals, they do by law have to reveal who they are, what agency they're with. And as far as I am aware, they are doing those things.
A lot of times they're not. I've seen the videos. A lot of times they're not. The other thing is, I mean, Trump and his, supporters and some aides, they post the names and pictures of judges and their families.
That's
and
exactly what
all
I
of that
was
stuff,
say.
and nobody talks about protecting them. They're not even law enforcement.
So now are we going to have judges have masks on if that's actually the excuse that they're using for these ICE agents to have masks? Look, I think the imagery is horrific from the standpoint of who the United States is and who we want to be from a global perspective. Who has sort of masked agents that come in and you have, masked agents grabbing a mom, breaking the window of a car, grabbing the mom in front of her screaming child and not identifying themselves and not saying why she's being arrested. This is horrific. This is not the America that we saw before Donald Trump became president. And what these ICE agents are doing, and this congressman called these ICE agents terrorists, they are instilling terror and fear
So are they
and
terrorists?
panic. They're instilling terror
doing their job?
and fear and panic.
So should they
in
not
the
do their job?
community.
Should they not do
When
their
they
job,
go,
Maria?
When they
No,
go,
I'm asking,
there
should they
is-
not do
there
their
is a
job?
better way to do their job.
So they
When
should
go-
tell their bosses, we're
when
just
they
not going to
go
arrest illegal immigrants. We're not going to do our jobs. Sorry, I'm going home.
No, there's a better way to do the job. They should actually go after those violent criminals.
They should go after anyone who broke the law, which means if you enter our country illegally, that is. But they are criminals,
But here's
Maria.
the problem.
But they are
But
criminals.
here's a problem, Shermichael.
I wanna
They
give
are
Bill a
not
chance to
when they are
say
in
something
court, going through the process of asking for asylum. They are actually following the law.
And many
when
of
they
them
leave,
have deportation orders. And
no,
you know
they
that to
don't.
be
Not
true.
at that point.
Many of them
And
do.
when
All right,
they
let me
leave
let
and get
Bill have a
arrested,
word
then you
on
give
this
them the
topic.
ability to say, you know what, I don't have to show up for my court order.
I mean, it's pathetic to pretend that, oh, we're so concerned about their
Yeah.
safety, they have to wear masks. I grew up in New York City, 40,000 cops, extremely dangerous circumstances. None of them wear masks except in extremely rare occasions when they were going after some gang leader who might have relatives who go after them. If they didn't, ICE agents have functioned in this country, they didn't wear masks, they shouldn't wear masks. It's total nonsense. And it's for intimidation. It's not really for their protection. It's ridiculous.
Somebody said,
Russian and Ukrainian.
how do we know if how do we know if they are illegals without due process? How do you know your pizza is ready at Papa John's? How do you know? How do you know if your pizza is ready at Papa John's? Do you demand due process for your pizza?
Officials met for a second round of peace talks in Istanbul on Monday, but the discussions ended nearly as soon as they began and without any major breakthroughs. Now, both sides did agree to work on a new prisoner exchange. However, on the matter of a ceasefire, statements from both delegations indicate that neither side budged on their positions. Moscow, for its part, maintained its maximalist terms, which includes Ukraine's surrender of 4 mainland regions.
In this case with Russia and Ukraine is doing a lot. Another update just happened today. And yeah, we're going to talk about it. But first, let's see this.
Russia attempted to illegally annex soon after the invasion in 2022. That's according to details of the peace memorandum reported by Russian state media. The direct peace talks came just one day after Ukraine's daring drone strike operation targeting airfields deep inside Russia. The Ukrainian president praised the brilliant operation, saying that the strikes were launched out of necessity.
We don't want to demonstrate our strength. We are demonstrating it because the enemy doesn't want to stop. We demonstrate it in a fair way on military targets. And we don't only demonstrate it to the Russian aggressors, but also to all those allies that once were strong allies and have now started doubting us. The trust towards Ukrainians and faith in Ukraine has returned.
Nick Payton-Walsh breaks down how Ukraine carried out the operation.
A bird's eye view of humiliation. Ukrainian drones halfway across Russian Siberia, seconds from hitting the Kremlin's most prized bombers. But the data was bad for Moscow. 117 drones hitting 41 long-range bombers across Russia, a Ukrainian security source said. A torn-up skyline here in Belaya. Exactly what Moscow dreaded and Ukraine needed, a boost to its flagging morale. Damaging Russia's war machine for sure, but maybe also its calculus in peace talks.
Our Operation Spiderweb yesterday proved that Russia must feel what its losses mean. That is what will push it toward diplomacy.
Ukraine hit Irkutsk, 4,500 kilometers away from Ukraine, where Google Earth still shows similar propeller-driven aircraft in the open. But they also struck Alenia, right on the Arctic Circle. Similar planes also on Google. Another example of something that just was not meant to happen in Russia's brutal war of choice. The how was as extraordinary. Ukraine's security service head, Vasyl Malyuk, commenting here. And releasing these images of the wooden mobile homes they used the roof cavities of to hide the drones. Before their release, once Ukraine said all their operatives were out of Russia. the planes hit, mainly the Tupolev 95 and Tupolev 22, the Ukrainian source said, aging, easy to damage, hard to replace. They were partly behind the nightly terrors that beset Ukrainian civilians. Whether these strikes make a dent in this daily toll will take weeks to learn. But it may also damage the Kremlin quicker, away from the front lines, its pride hit hard. Although state TV put on a fierce display of why Russia has been pummeling Ukraine so relentlessly. It may also, too, change its thinking, perhaps towards peace talks that continued Monday in Istanbul, and of how long Russia can sustain this war if Ukraine keeps throwing painful surprises its way. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, London.
Here now is military analyst, retired Colonel Cedric Layton. Cedric, just your reaction when you heard, this is estimates of some $7 billion in unrecoverable damage to these Tupolev bombers that predate Russian independence. This was really the Soviet aircraft that were targeted. Ukraine says as many as 40. That number may be in question, but Russia didn't have more than 100. And the significance here is that these were capable of carrying out long-range ballistic missile attacks into Ukraine. How big of a setback is this for Russia?
Well, this could be a huge setback for Russia, Brianna, and one of the key things about this is that the mechanisms that, we'll call them mechanisms for a second here, these aircraft that the Ukrainians hit, the Tupolev 95 and 22 aircraft, they are not only the aircraft that were used to attack Ukraine using cruise missiles, but they're also part of the nuclear deterrent that the Soviet Union and then Russia created. Not only for the Cold War, but in the post-Cold War period. And that's a significant thing because basically what the Ukrainians have done is taken out probably about a third or so of those aircraft from the Russian inventory. And that makes it very hard for the Russians to continue to prosecute the war like they did. And the one other thing that they did was they took out an A-50, which is a so-called mainstay aircraft. That's an AWACS-like aircraft. That means command and control. So now command and control is much more difficult for the Russians to exercise while they attack Ukrainian targets. So this is a very significant development.
You know that it took about 18 months to plan, and the Lieutenant General, who's head of Ukraine's main security and intelligence agency, the SBU, said that these were ordered specifically from President Zelensky. And in addition to the task of smuggling the drones into the country, they followed later by small wooden mobile cabins, people familiar with the planning said, and then the drones were concealed underneath these cabins where the roofs ultimately retracted after months of just sitting there. And we've seen some of the video of these drones then flying out and striking these air facilities throughout Russia. And, it's important to highlight the size and scale of Russia and where these aircraft were located. The impact that has now in terms of how safe and secure the Russian Air Force and the Russian military in general feels about where they store their military equipment.
Yeah, this is a significant vulnerability. The Russians clearly thought that they were going to be safe, especially in Siberia, although there have been some indications that other air bases that the Russians have, once closer to Ukraine, were much more vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. And that's kind of obvious from a geographic standpoint. But what the Ukrainians did was they, in essence, opened up Russia to these so-called first-person view drones. And these drones don't have a very long range. But the very fact that they were able to, in essence, subvert the Russian trucking system to get these drones into those wooden houses and then kind of do a James Bond-like retract the roof, type system where they actually moved the roofs back when they were ready to launch, that really shows a very high degree of planning, a very sophisticated planning effort. And, those 18 months or so that it took to plan this was basically 18 months very well spent because they not only looked at the target on the Ukrainian side, but they assessed exactly what it would take to go after all of these different targets, all of these different air bases that they hit. And these air bases included places in Siberia, like we're seeing here, and then also places as far north as the Murmansk region on the Kola Peninsula in northern Russia above the Arctic Circle. So these are the kinds of things that the Ukrainians did, and the planning was masterful. It's basically on the scale of what you would have seen in World War II when Winston Churchill told his version of the SBU, the Special Operations Executive in his case, back in 1940, he said, "Set Europe ablaze." Well, the Ukrainians have set part of Russia ablaze, and it's a very significant development.
Yeah, I can't help but think of President Zelensky now in the Oval Office, going back to that disastrous meeting in February when President Trump and J.D. Vance famously, said to him, "You don't have the cards," and knowing that he had at least this card up his sleeve and had been in the works for months. Could any of this happen, in your view, without the aid of U.S. intelligence?
Yes, it could have. I mean, there are certain things that the Ukrainians certainly benefited from when it comes to U.S. intelligence. But the fact is that there's satellite imagery available through private open sources such as Maxar technologies, so they don't necessarily need the U.S. to do this. They could have also gotten some intelligence from the Europeans. But the Ukrainians have a very extensive intelligence network within Russia, and they've kind of proven that by conducting operations like this. And one thing we have to note is what President Zelensky said when he said that the quote office unquote, meaning the I guess operational headquarters of at least part of this operation, was right next to one of the regional headquarters of the FSB, the Russian State Security Service. So they were doing this right under the noses of the Russians, and that is certainly a very, very significant development from an intelligence perspective as well as from an operational perspective. Now it will of course depend on how long the effects are. This might not be as long-lasting a thing as the Ukrainians would like, but I think the effects are certainly there psychologically, kind of like the Doolittle raid, to use another World War II analogy, where we, attacked the Japanese and did it off of aircraft carriers, and the Japanese weren't expecting that at that particular point in time. So the Russians clearly weren't expecting this, and this is the result that we see right now.
I would imagine screenwriters are already busy working on Spider's Web and how they could turn that into a
Of course, they're about to make that a TV show on Netflix, Ukraine, Russia, Spider Web, instead of talking about how to end this BS. All right, this is the attack that Ukraine launched on Russia today. Check this out.
In London for us, and Nick, we're watching intelligence agency showing the moment the bombs went off. While this is the third time Ukraine has hit the 12-mile bridge that's connecting occupied Crimea to mainland Russia since the war began, Ukraine is describing it as a new type of operation. We've got CNN's international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, in London for us. And Nick, we're watching this video. You can see those underwater bombs going off. I firstly want to talk about the damage we're seeing on the Crimea bridge. It's clearly very strategic for Russia. Tell me what we know.
Yeah, as the Ukrainians say, it's the third time they've tried to target the bridge, and this time they've gone for one of the sort of vertical concrete pillars that holds the bridge above the water, 35 meters above the water, 9 meters of water. It's not clear how deep. If it was at the base, there's a lot of silt at the base of the Kerch Strait there, that's underneath the Crimea bridge. So this explosion, the Ukrainians are saying, involved 1,100 pounds of TNT equivalent. That is a pretty massive explosion, and we've just been able to see some video shot from a distance from the bridge, and you really can see a huge plume of smoke, water rising up next to the bridge, but it's not quite clear what has actually been damaged, the lasting damage, the impact of all of this. It's important for Ukraine to target because it connects mainland Russia with annexed Crimea. Now, since Russia began that invasion in 2022, they've taken essentially a land corridor, a land bridge that links mainland Russia to Crimea. But when they annexed it in 2014, they had nothing linking it but a ferry. So high-speed effort 4 years later, they build this 12-mile-long, estimated $3 billion rail and road bridge to link mainland Russia with Crimea. And Russia uses it to resupply and stock munitions closer to the front line in Crimea. And Crimea is also an important naval base for the Russian military as well. So strategically, hugely important. And as we've seen, Ukraine is really going after high-value targets, these strategic bombers over the weekend, hitting a significant number of those, and now targeting this bridge again and indicating, the SBU indicating that this is not one and done, that there may be others to follow, the first explosion of this type. And I think, you know, just as we're sort of looking at how Ukraine is trying to blow up this bridge, the two previous attempts were different. One, 2022, the explosion seemed to be much more at road level. An explosive placed just under the road level disabled the road for a period of time. And then the other one, again innovative in 2023, these baby sea drones, as they were called at the time, waterborne drones, innovative effort by the Ukrainians to hit the bridge at water level. And that's why the Ukrainians this time are saying this is an underwater attack. This is what makes it different. And of course, with so many stanchions under that bridge, the Russians have got quite a job on their hands now to see if Ukraine is actually putting out accurate information that there may be more explosives underneath some of the other pillars.
I also want to talk about Ukraine striking Zaporizhia and Kherson and leaving people without electricity. This is within Ukraine, but it's Russian-held territory. Keeping in mind that we saw a sophisticated attack deep within Russia yesterday. The assault seems to be quite aggressive right now from the Ukrainian side. Tell me what we're seeing in Russian-held territory right now and the significance of this, Nick.
Yeah, the significance appears to be, when you're cutting off electricity, it's demoralizing to the Russian forces there. One of the reasons Ukraine has sort of held back from doing this sort of attack on its own territory, albeit effectively annexed and controlled by Russian forces, in part in Zaporizhia, in part in Kherson, is because there are Ukrainians living there too. But this does seem to be the Ukrainians trying to take the fight to the Russians in a way that that undermines Russia's warfighting abilities. Ukraine is taking some losses at the front. We've seen Sumy in the north, the town there, be heavily hit and targeted again in the city center, according to Ukrainian city officials in Sumy, right into the city center, missiles landing in the city center. So there's pressure coming on Ukrainian forces by, if you will, Russia's, if you want to call it standard military tactics of hammer and grind away at the front, hit cities just behind the front line, whereas Ukraine is trying to sort of hit in a precision way, potentially because that they view as the best use of the weapons and munitions that they have at their disposal. And that does seem to include hitting the electricity or taking down the electricity supplies in Zaporizhia and in Kherson.
All right, Nick Robertson, thank you so much for that update. I want to bring in military analyst Cedric Layton, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Cedric, always good to have you on, especially when we're just seeing so much news coming through. I want to talk about...
As much as I don't like Zelensky, I just don't like Zelensky, but Vladimir had a 2-hour call with the 45th, now the 47th president of the United States. I would say, show some respect. Show some respect. I get it. You have the force to do what you want to do. Russia has the largest land mass on Earth. Okay? I get it. Russia is capable. But if you say Trump is someone that you respect and you get on a phone call with this person for 2 hours, and then 2 seconds later, you do something stupid to Ukraine, I mean, what is... The Ukrainians are just supposed to say, you know what? Okay, we're just going to wait for what? What are they going to do? I mean, if somebody is trying to sit down and advocate for peace with you, and then you turn around after you've said, you know what, okay, we're gonna chill, and you turn around and do something else, what do you expect? I really support whatever Russia gets at this point. Whatever Russia gets, they get at this point. Matter of fact, I think it should be tripled. I'm sorry, it should be 10x. Matter of fact, 10x. Everybody needs to come together and show Vladimir Putin that you're not God, bro. You're not God, bro. Nobody can be God, bro. Chill.
There's so much that's happened. Ukraine striking the Crimea bridge with these underwater explosives. This is after striking Zaporizhia, Kherson. We saw what happened deep within Russia. How are you reading into these attacks? And is it making a big difference in terms of the calculus and the strength of Ukraine right now that has clearly been on the back foot for quite some time?
Yeah, Eleni, great to be with you again. The big thing that the Ukrainians are trying to do is basically what Nick pointed out, and that is hit strategically important targets. And so when you see what they're doing, you go through every single aspect. There's a lot of planning that's involved in what the Ukrainians have been doing. And that planning seems to indicate that they're looking at the most effects that they can achieve. So when you look at what's happening with the bridge, the Kerch Bridge, which is a strategically important, vital link between Russia proper and Crimea, they are basically saying, the Ukrainians are saying that this is the place where they are going to, in essence, take a stand. They don't have the manpower to reoccupy Crimea, but they will make it as miserable as possible for the Russians who are occupying Crimea. And that is one of the ways to do that, is to cut off the supplies, make the bridge basically unusable. It's both a rail and a road bridge. And that bridge is basically the one that is such a prestige project for the Russian Federation. Putin himself was there at the opening of the bridge, and he was there at the reopening of the bridge. So that's the kind of thing that they understand. The Ukrainians understand that the Russians have these prestige projects, and they are very much interested in damaging those prestige projects. And the Kerch Bridge is basically at the top of that list. And then if you move on to what has happened with the bomber fleet and the other airplane involved with everything that was happening on Sunday, you see that there are so many different target sets that the Ukrainians were able to, in essence, prosecute, and using that kind of as a military term, which basically means that they went after these targets. So when they went after these targets, they were sending a message. It's a risky operation, both operationally and politically, as well as obviously diplomatically. But the operation that they engaged in is one in which they sent a clear message that everything that the Russians have, their most valuable assets, that all of that is potentially at risk from Ukrainian unconventional attacks. And that is something that could potentially be a game changer for the Ukrainians.
That's rightly so. I mean, it's also showing vulnerabilities on the Russian side, where the Ukrainians were able to go so deep within Russia on this covert attack, which clearly was successful. We've also heard Zelensky explaining the logic behind this. Cedric, I want you to listen to what he said.
We don't want to demonstrate our strength. We are demonstrating it because the enemy doesn't want to stop. We demonstrate it in a fair way on military targets. And we don't only demonstrate it to the Russian aggressors, but also to all those allies that once were strong allies and have now started doubting us. The trust towards Ukrainians and faith in Ukraine has returned.
So that's the theory. That's Zelensky's thinking. But does it give Ukraine an advantage? Because there's a difference between what we're seeing on the front lines and then these precision attacks.
Yeah, there definitely is a difference. So when people see attacks like this is basically, in addition to being a military war, a military campaign, it is also a PR campaign. And it's very essential for the Ukrainians to basically bring their allies back, convince people in the United States that Ukraine is worth fighting for. Same in Western Europe, making sure that each of these allies of Ukraine, as Zelensky has called them, that they truly stand with Ukraine. And it is these kinds of attacks, these basically sensational attacks, that really show that the Ukrainians have capabilities that, in essence, belie what is happening on the front lines. The front lines, they're not collapsing, but there are definitely pressures on the front lines. And it's very difficult for the Ukrainians, just by sheer numbers of personnel, the difference between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces in terms of numbers and in terms of equipment and just in terms of volume. What the Ukrainians are doing is they're relying on precision, as Zelensky mentioned, and that precision does several things. First of all, it shows that the Ukrainians are using intelligence very precisely. They are not using the old Russian or Soviet method of going after a target with mass, with lots of military forces, with lots of weapons, with lots of artillery. They're basically modernizing what the approach is on the Ukrainian side, and that means less indiscriminate killing when it comes to civilian targets. Basically, the Ukrainians try very hard not to hit civilian targets. The Russians don't care, and that's a big difference between them, and that helps the Ukrainians from a PR standpoint, especially in the West.
The fact is, the
Today,
truth
Ukrainian
is,
officials are saying that they have hit.
the truth is, if the United States steps back from Ukraine and say, you know what, we're not going to support you anymore with intel or whatever, Ukraine is gone. It's over. And that's the truth. Okay? We can say America first, which is America first. I don't care about any of all this country. But the fact is, human beings are literally dying for years now, 2-3 years now. And it's not stopping. Kids are dying. Children, like kids. Got a 5-year-old daughter. Okay. Kids are dying. Women are dying. Pregnant women are dying. Hospitals being bombed. Okay. You can only do that if you think you are God. That's my thing with Vladimir Putin. Okay. You cannot be thinking that you're God, because he did the same thing with Georgia. He's going to keep going deeper into Ukraine. We could say, well, Ukraine should have never started talking to NATO or trying to join NATO. I get it. Okay, Ukraine is in the saint. Okay, they're not angels. I get it. Okay, Ukraine is at fault as well. But when you have a conversation with another leader who has been preaching that he wants peace, he wants people to stop dying. Trump has said it like what, 1,000 times? I want peace. I want people to stop dying. And then you turn around and you do something stupid after having a 2-hour call with Trump. Look, I respect Trump, and I believe he knows what he's doing. I absolutely believe he knows what he's doing. But if Russia takes Ukraine, what does that say about the United States? I mean, just think about it. All right, we pull back. We said, nah, we're not doing nothing. And Russia takes Ukraine. What do you think China is going to do? You think China is going to say, oh, okay, we're going to go into Taiwan? All of this stuff happening is to test the United States. Really, truly, Russia doesn't care about Ukraine. It's the same thing with the tariff. When the 45th, now the 47th, Trump, when he started giving, or just when he announced blanket tariff, he didn't care about all of this other country. He cared about China. That's what you do. It's called the art of war. It's the art of the deal. You act like you're fighting everybody else, but you know what you truly want. Trump didn't care about all of this country. He was specifically focused on China, but he wanted everybody else to think that, okay, I want to renegotiate trade deals worldwide. But his main goal was China, but it didn't start with China. Now it's head to head with China. So it's the same thing with Ukraine and Russia. Russia truly doesn't care about, even if they do care about Ukraine, but they're trying to test the United States, because if they succeed, China is going straight to Taiwan. Like there's nothing that's going to stop China. And then what happens? What happens? Tell me what happens when Russia takes Ukraine, then China goes into Taiwan, then what? What happens next?
Another significant Russian asset, releasing this video of an explosion targeting the $3.7 billion Kerch Bridge, which connects occupied Crimea to Russia. Ukraine's security service says its agents planted more than 2,400 pounds of explosives underwater in an operation that lasted several months. This is the third time that Ukraine has attacked the bridge since the war began, and it comes just 2 days after Ukraine's remarkable spiderweb operation. Remember, Ukraine says that drone attack mission hit 41 long-range bomber jets at multiple air bases, some of them thousands of miles inside of Russia. Joining us now to discuss is retired U.S. Army Major Mike Lyons. Major Lyons, thanks so much for sharing your afternoon with us. So why has this bridge linking Russia and Crimea become such a key target?
Well, it's a major logistical supply chain for the Russians, bringing troops and material inside of Crimea. Crimea is really the reason why this whole invasion started. It's the must-have part of land that is in Ukraine that houses the Black Sea Fleet, the warm water port that the Russian Navy uses to try to project power throughout the world. So Crimea was always the most important aspect there. And this bridge attaches it to Russia proper. And so that's why, as Ukraine has tried to drop it in the past, Russia quickly rebuilds it because it's that important.
As Russian forces are pressing into portions of Ukraine, negotiations are still happening behind the scenes. I wonder what you make of some of the ceasefire options that Russia put forward in its peace memorandum. There are really two options here. Neither of them seem tenable for Kyiv.
No, none of them really are. They're the maximalist objectives that Russia had from the beginning of this war, and they're not acceptable on any level. And as long as the Ukraine government can stay out in front with more creative military tactics like Operation Spiderweb. I mean, just incredible to think this is the first drone swarm we've seen to be effective now. There's this principle of mass that it describes warfare. And in the past, it's been tanks and infantry and aircraft doing certain things. And now Ukraine has brought this new aspect to the table, and that's drones. And what they've done is, from a cheap perspective, is to strike deep into Russia, go after strategic targets, have a psychological advantage over them right now. So if go back to the negotiations, right now, Ukraine thinks it's got more in the way of keeping this fight going, getting more allies on its side. I think Russia clearly is on its heels right now.
When you talk about the innovative and disruptive nature of that Operation Spiderweb, do you imagine that something like that could be carried out on air bases here in the United States, that someone could take these sort of relatively inexpensive drones and strap them with explosives and just send them in to destroy American planes?
Absolutely, Boris. No question. I think military planners cleared their desks over the weekend as they saw this take place, and to come up with new and more creative air defense platforms to protect air assets that are on the ground here. In the past, you used to hit a missile with a missile was like 1-to-1, but I think you're going to see now, to try to take out one-to-many is much more difficult. But there's no question that we have to be thinking, for example, of Chinese containers that are off the shore of the United States. They could be carrying these kinds of weapons platforms, and I guarantee there'll be more than just 100 of them. What if they deploy 10,000 of them or so? So that's the threat that exists right now. I think, and this is maybe what the president was thinking about with Golden Dome, about trying to protect us, but it's not going to be the one-off ICBM coming in. It's going to be the drone swarm that could come from our enemies that we've got to be very more creative in this space of how we're going to defend.
Major Mike Lyons, great to get your perspective as always.
Thanks, Boris.
Joining us now for more on this is retired General Wesley Clark. He's the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. General Clark, always good to see you. It's notable that every time it appears Ukraine is losing on the battlefield, we see some of this ingenious maneuvering, asymmetrical attacks that they impose on Russia, whether it was the attacks on the military bases, taking out, they report 40 of their bomber planes. But even if that number is in the dozens, that is still quite significant. Now this bridge again attacked for the third time, connecting Russia to Crimea. Talk about the impact this has on the Russian military and where things stand at all when it comes towards some peace negotiations.
Well, on the battlefield, Bianna, actually, Ukraine's basically holding its own. We know there's a staging of Russian forces in the northeast. We know kind of what the Russian campaign plan would like to see unfold. They would like to see an offensive in the northeast against Kharkiv, drawing in all of the Ukrainian forces up there to defend Kharkiv, and then they would like to make a run for Odessa and take Odessa and lock Ukraine out of its ability to export through the Black Sea. That would be their winning plan, but they're not able to execute that. Now, these other strikes, like the attack on the Kerch Bridge, we haven't seen whether the span has fallen or not, but clearly Russian engineers have got to go in there and they've got to see what the strength of the bridge is, and they're going to put a stop on traffic until they can make an assessment. At the very least, that's helpful logistically. There are other ways that there's a rail line that's been built that goes directly through Mariupol that can provide logistic support for the Russian forces so they don't have to go through Crimea. But still, this is helpful. The strikes by the drones, it took out a substantial number of Russian aircraft. It's a huge psychological blow to President Putin and to the armed forces. You can be sure that there'll be a lot of people sacked in the security forces and in the armed forces who were supposed to protect these air bases. And there'll be a further tightening of whatever they can do to prevent drones and explosives and wooden boxes from moving around in Russia. But the war is going to continue until Putin understands he cannot win. And so this is why the statement by the NATO Secretary General is so important and why we need strong U.S. leadership. We need the Trump administration to reinforce what the Biden administration was doing with military assistance to Ukraine. Patriot missiles, 155 artillery ammunition, small arms, new technology like lasers to shoot down drones. All of that needs to go in. When Putin realizes he can't win, that's when this war will stop.
Right, so you're saying that essentially what should come of all of this is the Trump administration giving more military aid to Ukraine. One of the things that Zelensky talked about is this idea that, yes, of course, he's trying to send a message to Vladimir Putin, but he is also trying to send a message to Donald Trump as well. This idea that we're not as much of the underdogs as you might think. We can actually do well and we can carry our weight in this war, hoping that perhaps because Donald Trump doesn't see them as potential losers anymore, that maybe he might step up in terms of aid and assistance. I mean, do you think that's going to be really the case here, General?
I think it's certainly the hope that that President Trump and his administration will see that this is not a defeated Ukraine, that providing assistance can help assure security and also give us a stronger position vis-a-vis China in the Pacific. But it remains to be seen. President Trump is very, very reluctant to take any measures against Mr. Putin. There's a big sanctions bill going through Congress. Hopefully it passes, and then it'll be up to President Trump to pull the trigger on it. The thing is, he needs to pull the trigger on something because that's what's missing right now. The statements by lower level officials, that's great. Military exercises in Europe, that's great. But it's really down to President Trump and his credibility. And the credibility in Ukraine is going to carry over to his credibility in dealing with tariffs and dealing with the Chinese threat in the Pacific. So I hope the administration recognizes this, and I certainly hope President Trump will make the right moves to reinforce Ukraine.
What do you think the strategy is going to be going forward? Will Russia, for example, no longer group aircraft together? You know, is that one way to sort of mitigate the risks here?
Well, they've already moved the bombers a long way away. So there's a possibility they can put shelters over the remaining aircraft. That's expensive. It takes a while to do that. They'll certainly tighten up security around the air bases. They'll also put renewed effort on an intelligence offensive inside Ukraine. Imagine, how could this have been done for 18 months and not one word of it leaked to Russia. This will infuriate Mr. Putin. He will demand that his agents in Ukraine produce better results. And so there'll be actions inside Russia like this to tighten up security. But it's not just the aircraft. It's his fleet. His Black Sea fleet is suffering. There's sabotage in the Black Sea fleet. He knows it. He can't get some of these ships out of port. So there's a lot of corruption in the Russian military. And the way it works in Russia, of course, it's not a democracy. So people take whatever actions they think they can get away with. Sugar in the gas tanks of military vehicles, sabotage on ships, can't find the repair parts for aircraft. And so there is a certain dragging of the feet in the Russian military that will probably be intensified after this operation.
All right, General Wesley Clark, always good to see you. Thank you.
Oof.
A path forward on President Trump's sweeping tax and spending bill. Senate Majority Leader John Thune is setting out an ambitious timeline to pass a bill by July 4th, and he says they're on track to do it. It is still a closely divided Senate, though. And
what do you guys think about the big, beautiful bill? Some Republicans are saying that this is going to increase the debt and the deficit going on right now. And some liberals are saying, yeah, of course, this is what we told y'all. Even Elon Musk is saying that this is going to increase the debt.
You have one group of Republicans who are concerned about Medicaid specifically because they're from states which depend on it. West Virginia Senator Shelley Moore Capito says she heard a lot of concern in her state over the proposed changes. Some senators want to see more cuts across the board.
The House did a pretty good job, in my opinion. We can do more, I think, in the Senate. And I've said repeatedly, I'm all for reducing spending until we run out of votes. But we need to pass something because we need to renew the tax cuts.
Another group of senators threatening to vote no over concerns about the deficit. House Speaker Mike Johnson has promised the bill doesn't increase it. Senator Rand Paul says the bill contains a measure to raise the debt ceiling, something he and a few others oppose.
You can say it doesn't directly add to the debt, but if you increase the ceiling $5 trillion, you'll meet that. And what it does is it puts it off the back burner, and then we won't discuss it for a year or two. So I think it's a terrible idea to do this.
Has this president called you? Have you spoken to him about this yet?
I spoke to him this week, had a lengthy discussion with him.
How did that go?
He did most of the talking.
He didn't convince you.
Joining me now in the group chat, Jackie Kucinich, CNN political analyst and Washington bureau chief for the Boston Globe, Chuck Rocha, Democratic strategist and senior advisor to the Bernie Sanders presidential campaigns, and Ashley Davis, former White House official under George W. Bush. Welcome, guys.
Good morning.
Good to have you. Jackie, I want to start with you because you heard there even the Senator Paul was on the phone with Trump. So obviously Trump is leaning in to try and crack some of those who are putting some who are raising opposition to the bill. What are your reporters saying about what they're learning?
You know, I think Trump also got on the phone with Josh Hawley, who's another senator who's been very outspoken
from Missouri,
from Missouri. And he's had a New York Times op-ed about his concerns about cuts to Medicaid. And it does seem like they have a lot to talk about in this bill. And the Senate, when has the Senate not wanted to change something that the House sent over? So what can they change that won't upset Mike Johnson's math? That's the open question at
Hawley
this point.
actually said he spoke to Trump. He wrote on Twitter/X, just had a great talk with President Trump about the big, beautiful bill. He said again, no Medicaid benefit cuts. Problem solved. I mean, does he sound convinced? Like, what do you make of that?
Well, I think what you're hearing from House Republicans is that they're not cutting Medicaid. They're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't know if that's going to fly when senators actually start digging into it. That's messaging, not necessarily what the bill does.
Okay, you guys.
When you start explaining how you're not cutting Medicaid, the explaining part is what political consultants like, because you're cutting Medicaid. It could be folks that they deem not qualified to be on Medicaid, and that's their right. But to me, it's cutting Medicaid, and when I make a TV commercial, it'll say cut Medicaid. This is what Senator Hawley doesn't want. This is what a lot of Republicans in the midterms don't want. And I understand that we have a budget debate and we can go through the policies and the nuances, and I'm not going to be the policy expert. I'll leave that to my friend Ashley, but I will say that for making political ads. If you cut Medicaid, that's what I'm going to say.
Okay, actually, I want to get to you, but Chuck just brought up this idea about political ads. The Conservative Club for Growth is already releasing ads targeting Lisa Murkowski and Kevin Cramer, some people who are also reluctant, and they want to put some pressure on them. Here's a little bit of it.
One big, beautiful bill. We love that bill.
But there's one big problem. Senator Kevin Cramer opposing Trump's bill because it guts Biden's climate law, saying, quote, "There are too many things in there that are too important." Tell Murkowski, don't block Trump's agenda. Make tax relief permanent because strong hands built Alaska.
Okay, so the voice actors who do these kinds of ads are going to be busy because it's like, tell so-and-so that they're screwing you.
But I also think that's going to play differently in North Dakota than it is in Alaska.
But it's the fact that the ads are targeted, I
yes,
think.
And which is the new way of life right now, right? I mean, in general. But let's just go back to the bill for 2 seconds. The Senate Republicans are meeting today. Thune's going to tell them he wants this done by June 20, the week of June 23rd on the floor. So that means that it passes by July 4th. We'll see if that happens or not. You have 5 committees this week coming out with their package of the bill. They're not going to do markups in their committee. You have Ron Johnson and Rick Scott who've kind of changed their tunes over since last night in regards to listen, we want certain things. We're concerned about the deficit. We're concerned about the budget. However, we want this bill to pass. Mm-hmm. And then you have Josh Hawley, kind of stepping things back a little bit. So
I feel like I need a chart.
You're really dealing with, and the other 2 senators that you're really dealing with are Murkowski and Collins, right? Mm-hmm. So that's your universe to get on board. But they're moving quick, and he's going to try to get this done. And
so you think even the speed is a factor?
Yeah, I think speed is the most important factor. They got to get this done. Yes, this thing hangs out there longer. You start losing people. It's going to be bad.
I think the bill gets passed, number one, and I think they get it passed by the recess because they kind of have to.
Yeah. President Donald Trump working overtime right now to get Republican senators on board and get on board quickly with his sweeping domestic policy agenda as he is aiming to get his massive tax cut and spending bill that passed the House to get it passed through the Senate and headed to him before July 4th. He had the Senate Majority Leader at the White House yesterday. He's been putting in personal calls to some of the other Republicans who have been the most vocal with their concerns about what's headed their way. Republicans making clear that changes are coming to the House-passed bill. But how much and what? A lot of Republicans talking specifically about changes to the trillions of dollars in cuts to programs like food stamps and Medicaid and the impact that would have on their constituents. Maine's Senator Susan Collins telling reporters she's, quote, very concerned about not only low-income families, but our rural hospitals. Other senators, of course, are concerned about the impact the bill will have on the deficit. Rand Paul concerned about the debt ceiling.
You can say it doesn't directly add to the debt, but if you increase the ceiling $5 trillion, you'll meet that. And what it does is it puts it off the back burner, and then we won't discuss it for a year or two. So I think it's a terrible idea to do this.
Joining me right now is the former Republican governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu. It's good to see you.
You bet. Good to be here.
So the Senate takes up the bill now, and Republicans have made no secret that they will see changes, though Thune seems to try to be suggesting that it's not going to veer too far from the priorities. But take a senator like Josh Hawley. He's conservative. He has been very vocal about he will not cannot support any cuts to Medicaid benefits. He called it, what he said as he wrote about this, he said cutting funding for a program like Medicaid would be morally wrong and politically suicidal. Do you agree with that?
It's not politically suicidal, and I don't think it's morally wrong. I think it's just a huge number. And the dynamic comes to this. Most states have expanded Medicaid.
Yep.
Under traditional Medicaid, the feds pay 50%, the state pays 50%. But under expanded Medicaid, 90% is paid by the federal government. So what they're saying is, okay, let's ratchet that back.
But didn't you do that in New Hampshire?
We do. We do it in New Hampshire. So the question is, are they going to be dumb and cut the whole thing back to 50%? Or are they going to ramp it down, block grant more of this money to the states? See, with a block grant, let the states decide how much go to SNAP, how much go to supporting rural hospitals and things of that nature. They're also looking to cut back that tax. It's kind of a matching tax that then goes to support a lot of the traditional or non-Medicaid patients, those that have uncompensated care, as we call it. That's the rural hospital argument you see. So I don't think it's politically suicidal if they do it the right way.
Why where's the disconnect between, you do not think it's politically suicidal. No. Why does Josh Hawley then think it's politically suicidal?
Because everyone in Washington is a coward. I mean, really, everything they do in D.C. is based on the lowest common denominator of tough decisions. They don't want to make any tough decisions. They have to cut money somewhere. They got to have to make some changes.
5 seconds ago in relative history, we're also a man that needed to get elected and needed to answer to his constituents. What if this is them answering to their constituents?
I'm telling you, if you can cut taxes, if you can find ways to make tough decisions, be super transparent about it, people want to know the government is spending their money in a responsible way, and they know that sometimes that's a tough decision. To say that we're not going to do anything on Medicaid, you know what that tells America? We're going to do nothing on Social Security or Medicare or any of these other things. We're going to keep running up our debts. We're going to keep spending money in inefficient ways. We're not willing to make those tough decisions. So it's not easy, but the American people want to know that there's responsibility on the other end. I'm not saying you go slash Medicaid, but you find ways to let the states make more decisions on their own so that they can make those shifts, get rid of the bureaucracy and the wasted money. Get a lot of look, it's a state-run program with federal money, so let the states run it. I can't tell you, let's say I needed a new pharmaceutical, a new medication for someone with a rare disease. You know, it would take me almost 2 years as a governor to sometimes get that approved by the federal government. Why? Let the states decide. Let the states have more power and say in it, and you'll save tons of money without losing any access to services.
It is fascinating to hear you say that those in Washington are all cowards. I think a lot of people saw the flip, which was Josh Hawley standing up and speaking out against what maybe Donald Trump's position he thought would be, which is cutting Medicaid benefits, which people still fear is actually going to happen. That actually was a sign of courage on the part of a conservative Republican senator.
Yeah, if you're looking at the courage against the administration and all that, I'm just looking at courage to make tough decisions and say, look, we have a fiscal crisis. We have a very inefficient Medicaid system. There's much better ways to make the entire system more efficient without losing all. It isn't about the federal government saying we're taking this SNAP benefit or we're taking this access to rural hospitals. It's letting the states decide how to best manage that, ramping it down over time so that the states can adjust with their matching dollars.
On Capitol Hill, Donald Trump.
All right, thank you for tuning into the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. It is currently 8:39 p.m. And of course, today's date is the 3rd of June, 2025. Yes, instead of looking for perfection, seek for consistency. Never give up on yourself. Never give up on your dreams. Never give up on God. Believe in yourself, believe in your dreams, and believe in Almighty God. Believe the United States is the greatest country on earth, and peace will reign, all right? Regardless of what anybody thinks, this is my opinion. I believe the United States is the greatest country on earth, all right? And fathers, take care of your kids. I always say that. Fathers, take care of your kids, all right? I know life is hard. You got to work. You got to put in the hours. I get it. You got the bills. You got to pay all that. But take care of your kids. Spend some time with your kids. Now, shout out to the veterans. Shout out to the military personnel. Thank you for your service. You guys protect the homeland. Shout out to the law enforcement officers. Thank you so much for what you do. God bless you. And shout out to everybody for tuning in. Shout out to esteemed member Luke. Shout out to Luke the GOAT. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to Ringmaster. Shout out to Sandra. And shout out to the outstanding moderators that we have: C. Shelley, Mr. Busky, Zyra's Garden, so many other ones I can't remember right now. Dana, everybody, great folks. God bless you for tuning in. And everybody, thank you for tuning in right now. Shout out to Dirt. Shout out to Dirt for tuning in as well. God bless you. He's watching on the other spot. God bless you. Don't matter if you're liberal or conservative. What matters is you are American and you support the ideology of being an American. You love this country. That's what matters. And unity is what we want. It doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. What I'm preaching right here is love, unity. Okay, that's why you see liberals in the chat, you see conservative in the chat. We don't block people except you start being maybe crazy. But yeah, Thank you, Terry, for tuning in. God bless you. We're gonna be back. We're gonna be back. Okay. I have a dinner date with my 5-year-old, so we're gonna go out now to eat something. Yeah, have a good time with my little baby, and you guys do the same. God bless you guys. God bless you guys. Thank you for tuning in. All right, I gotta go. I gotta go. Don't forget to like, double tap your screen to give this video a like. Also, we have memberships. It is $4.99 if you decide to join. Awesome. God bless you. Support the channel. What else? Also, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. It will be appreciated with consistency. Okay. All right. With that being said, I love you guys. It is your boy Genesis. America is the greatest country on earth. God bless you. God bless America. Enjoy your life and go outside. Let's go.